So aloha. Aloha. Horns up. Right. I have nothing to say about heavy metal today. I'm going to be talking actually about something that's been really weighing heavily on my mind. We're now 9.5 months just about into the Obama administration, and we're in a rare transition period that has been really friction-free. It's ordinarily the case, especially when you go from GOP to a Democratic administration, where there's a lot of backpedaling, where there's a lot that's said negatively about China, and then the realists take office and they need to sort of make all sorts of apologies, and this time we haven't seen that happen. Not really at all. We've had this little business with tire tariffs, but it was really quickly swept under the rug. And relations, I think, at this point are at the end of a 9-year, unprecedented period of smooth sailing. There's been really nothing to roil the waters since September 11th, in fact. So Sino-American relations, I'm happy to report, at an official level at least, are in very, very good shape. But unfortunately, if you look beneath the surface, if you look at Sino-American relations at a people-to-people level, which I'm prepared to argue is as important as the more visible state-to-state relationship, we're in a very a period that I think I wouldn't hesitate to call one of crisis. We're in a period where people-to-people relations between Chinese and what I'll loosely call Anglophone Westerners, to include not just Americans, but also the Brits and the Australians and the New Zealanders and the Irish and Canadians, are at a real low. This happened really as a result of the events of 2008, and it has not improved markedly since. It worries me for a number of reasons, which I'll get to, but let me give you some of the background as to why this happened. In the past, people-to-people relations between Americans, say, just for shorthand, and Chinese took place usually at a relatively small scale with intermediation. There were these formal sister city arrangements. We'd had visiting scholars. We'd have meet the Chinese things, sort of organized under the auspices of organizations, friendship organizations like the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association. These were, participants in these things tended to be kind of painfully polite. They weren't really speaking their minds in any sense. What's happened since, though, what's happened as a result, and really over the last 10 years, is two things. One has been the ubiquity of English language education in Chinese secondary schools, actually into the primary schools now. So it's really not at all uncommon to meet Chinese people who, even if they don't speak English fluently, can at least communicate in the written language. They can read and write quite well. The other thing that happened, of course, is the stupendous rise of the internet in China. If you look at 10 years ago in China, right around this time, in the year 1999, there were about 8 million people using the internet, many of whom were still using really primitive dial-up technology. Fast forward to today, and we're looking at close to 340 million internet users. 338 million was the last officially reported statistic. So from 8 million to 338 million in the course of 10 years. And now the people who use the internet have access to broadband almost uniformly, about 94% penetration in broadband. That is a major, major sea change. And that has made it possible for unmediated, large-scale interaction between Anglophone Westerners on the one hand and Chinese on the other. All that was missing then was a reason for them to talk to one another. And that reason came to us with the run-up to Beijing's Olympic Games, which were awarded to China in 2001, and were actually, of course, held in August of last year. But in the run-up, especially in the early spring, Chinese naturally became very curious as to see what the West, what the Western media was saying about China, now that eyes were all on China. And these people were, I think understandably, quite proud of their nation's accomplishments, having lifted that many people out of poverty, literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, having not really started any major conflagrations globally, having sort of sustained the global economy quite well and contributed significantly to global economic growth. They saw themselves as an essentially benevolent actor on the world stage, as China is coming up in the world, and Chinese were rightfully proud. They were in for an exceptionally rude shock, though, when they started to read what not only Western media organizations, but more importantly, what people responding to those, what people commenting about those reports were saying about China. They were really, really quite shocked to find the gigantic disconnect between their own ideas about their country and those apparently held by their peers in the outside world. Of course, the medium on which this was all happening was the internet. What started off as communication between a few politically minded individuals, taking place in English, on China-focused blogs, turned into something much bigger, much more widespread. It turned into a long, drawn-out, bloody, bruising, frenzied fight. It got really ugly, as these sorts of discussions on the internet can tend to. We all are familiar enough with the web to know that there are an awful lot of trolls and haters out there. But even if you were to strip away the most strident on each side, even if you were to take away the hyper-nationalistic Chinese whose sensibilities seem to be so easily bruised, and if you were to take away all the complete yahoos, in other words, if you were to take out the rednecks and the red guards from the equation, you still are left with two groups that are fundamentally at odds with one another, standing across from one another across a widening chasm. I think the metaphor here of me speaking about this in Hawaii is perfect because, here I am on an island in the middle of the Pacific. Maybe the scales are a bit larger, but I feel that as somebody who identifies as a bicultural Chinese and American, I often feel like I'm a denizen of a little island chain that sits in the gulf between these two sides. And unfortunately, as it happens, viewed from either side, my little island, and with a few other inhabitants on it, looks like a promontory on the other side, so that the Americans will always regard me as having sympathies that lie entirely with China, and the Chinese will regard me as having sympathies that lie entirely with America. And I want to make the case that, I am trying my damnedest to not show an allegiance to either, but an allegiance to both. I genuinely feel that as a bicultural person, I'm going to make the sacrifice. I'm going to be the guy who's going to grab every goddamn third rail out there and talk candidly about what drives the Chinese mind in their thinking. What I really wanted to do is try to promote understanding about this, but I'm up against something very, very bad. The internet is, as we know, this is a tremendous irony, is that marvel of human technological accomplishment, which is supposed to bring us all into a global village embrace. We're all supposed to hug one another, and we all, it's to break down all these barriers. What has it in fact done? It's made us all the more, ever more tribal and fractured. It's not just the case in China. In the United States, as you can see, between the red state websites and blue state websites, we read what we want to read. You either watch CNBC or you watch Fox News. Nobody gets a balanced diet anymore. The internet has really contributed to this. So either you're going to be reading the Huffington Post and the Daily Kos, or you might be reading some wacko right-wing website. The names of which I don't even know because I just don't. So what really concerns me here, though, is that this actually matters, and it matters in a significant way, and it matters in ways that actually touch on some of the things that we've talked about before. The internet in China has often been dismissed as greasy kid stuff. It's often been talked about as the entertainment superhighway as opposed to the information superhighway. And I've used that expression before, and to some extent it's true. There is an awful lot more entertainment content available on the Chinese internet. That is why a lot of people use it. But that ignores the fact that it's also the emerging public sphere of Chinese life. China never, and I mean never, has never had a public forum whereby interested intellectuals can gather and speak their minds relatively freely about the important issues of the day. The internet has provided that. Internet forums, blogs, all of these things has created a virtual public space in China. And it's become one that has assumed tremendous significance in China. Not only is it sort of the place where all the memes appear and where the artists cut their teeth, where the great writers kind of get their start, and where the little cultural phenomena, the equivalents of our William Hungs and things like that, just make their name. But more importantly, it's where people are taking on some very, very serious issues. we talk a lot, when we think about the internet in China, we think correctly, that it is a censored environment, but that lends us to believe that it is free of criticism, when in fact, there is an awful lot of very, very strident criticism of Chinese elites, of Chinese leadership on the websites. You can go only so far, but it's quite a bit further than I imagine most of you believe it to be. Why does that matter? Well, these days, it's rare to go a week or two without seeing a major news story break where the indignation of, or the persistent digging of internet-based gadflies has not unearthed or revealed a horrible scandal involving some official or another. I mean, I just rattle off a couple of them. In November of 2008, an official in the city of Shenzhen, China, in the south, was caught on a security camera in a restaurant, stumbling up drunkenly toward an 11-year-old girl, pushing her into a bathroom and trying to molest her. He comes stumbling out a little bit later, still on camera, where he's confronted by her parents and then pulls out his wallet, tries to bribe them into silence. All of this is still on camera. Fortunately, that video got uploaded immediately to China's most popular internet video site. Full disclosure, I consult for that site, Youku.com. And immediately, the guy was brought to justice. It's not just the internet, it's not just the fact of the video being there, it's the commotion that it caused. The thing went virally all over the internet. There was barely a person in China with any kind of sentience at all who wasn't aware of this situation. Just a few months ago, a woman in Chengdu who worked in a foot massage parlor, and not a sort of skanky massage parlor, but a legit foot massage parlor, was accosted by two, again, drunken individuals, one of whom was a fairly high-ranking official. They made unwanted sexual advances on her. She grabbed a handy fruit plate and eviscerated the guy, killing him and severely wounding the other guy. So the official died. She didn't end up in jail. The outcry on the internet was such that she was actually spared the horrors of Chinese prison and released into a fairly low-security psychiatric institute, but she's on her way out. So these are examples of sort of the power of the people on the Chinese internet. It's not always put to such good use. I actually worry about anything like this where it's not institutional, where it's entirely ad hoc, where it's more about sort of vigilantism and mob justice than it is about actual rule of law. It really does worry me. But the point that I really want to make, and I can point to a whole bunch of different illustrations as to how it goes wrong, but the point that I really want to make is that there's an empowerment now, that from the highest and loftiest Chinese officials in Zhongnanhai in Beijing down to the pettiest party functionaries in the county towns, they are constantly taking the temperature of public opinion now based on what is being said on the internet. The internet has empowered the netizenry in China. What does that mean for relations between the United States and China? It means a lot. Think about this. 10 years ago, when, as I said, there was a population of about 8 million internet users in China, one of the biggest tragedies in Sino-American relations took place. Does anyone remember what happened in May of 1999? The United States bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in what was then Yugoslavia. We dropped 5 smart bombs on there, killing a number of Chinese journalists. And to this day, I have yet to meet a Chinese national who does not believe, or at least very, very strongly suspect, that this was an action that was deliberately taken. They don't buy the American story that it was a mistake. I happen to be in the mistake camp just on the principle that if it's between conspiracy and stupidity, go with stupidity. But thank you. But that wasn't a popular opinion to have back then, as you can imagine. And I happened to be playing in a Chinese rock band, and this was part of the reason why I ended up soon afterward not playing in that Chinese rock band. But that's beside the point. The point is this. Back then, there were 8 million internet users, and already the internet was an absolute hotbed of conspiracy theory. It was the place where so-called patriotic hackers were getting together and launching denial of service attacks on American military websites and on intelligence websites, where all sorts of online mischief was being organized. It was an enormous event. I mean, it's very, very hard to overstate how significant it was and how damaging it was to Sino-American relations. Fast forward 10 years. If something like that were to happen again, God forbid, what would the government be able to do to prevent this? Now, in a world of internet video, of social networks, of microblogs like Twitter, where everyone is so much more connected, where there's just so much more information out there to be shared, it would be, I mean, flat out freaking catastrophic. I mean, let's make no mistake about that, all right? Because there are people on both sides spoiling for a fight at this point. Because the opinions that they have of one another have degenerated badly. There is no reset button on this. There is no way that we can simply, sweep everything under the rug and start again in the relationships between the people, because they differ on so many profound issues: on Tibet, on Tiananmen, on Taiwan, on trade, on Darfur, on Iran, on North Korean policy, on support for the junta in Myanmar, in support for Robert Mugabe's regime in Zimbabwe. You name it. There's a huge plethora of issues on which Chinese and Anglophone Westerners simply do not see eye to eye, in spite of the fact that in our internet world they are now standing nose to virtual nose. So this is what keeps me up at night, and this is what really scares me. What can we do about this? Well, one thing I really suggest is that we read our history. We need to understand more about the context in which Chinese people are coming at these issues. Okay? Think about this. I'm just going to wrap with one point. We've heard a lot about environmentalism today. I am encouraged in many ways at seeing environmental consciousness being raised among Chinese. But at the same time, all that browbeating that we're doing about the Chinese, about now being the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, we have created a backlash whereby now they are saying, you guys have had your turn at the trough for 100 years, 100 or more years, just spewing all sorts of pollutants into the air. Your carbon footprint, carbon's in the air for 30 years, is so much worse than ours. It's our turn at the trough. You need to have public support, as Jill was pointing out. It's not something that can be implemented top-down. We need to be on the same page. Americans and Chinese need to be on the same page as the two world's largest carbon emitters. We need to work together on this, and it has to happen at a people-to-people level. So there's a real imperative. So empathy, guys. Empathy for the Chinese. It doesn't require much more than closer readings, reading the bridge blogs. Afterward, I could make a lot of recommendations about some blogs that translate what the Chinese are actually writing and thinking about in their quiet hours when they don't believe that Whitey is prowling the premises. So please, I really think that this is an absolutely important issue for the most important bilateral relationship. We live in a bipolar world. Let's not see bipolar disorder come out of this. Okay? Thanks.